What if the bread sitting on your counter right now has weed killer baked into every single slice? And what if the word organic on the bag doesn't mean what you think it means? Before we go any further, do 3 things right now. Hit that like button so this video reaches more families who deserve to know this. Subscribe so you never miss the next brand we expose. And send this to the one person in your life who still thinks bread is just bread. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Bread is supposed to be simple. Flour, water, salt, maybe some yeast. That's it. That's what bread was for thousands of years. Across every culture, in every kitchen, long before factories got involved. But walk down any grocery aisle today, and you'll find loaves with 15, 20, even 30 ingredients crammed onto one small label. Preservatives you can't pronounce, chemicals borrowed from completely different industries, dough conditioners with names that sound like they belong in a chemistry lab, not a bakery. And in some cases, actual pesticide residue sitting quietly inside the crumb, waiting to be toasted and buttered and handed to a child before school. This isn't a story about calories or carbs. Forget everything you've heard about bread being just carbs. This is a story about what your bread is doing to your cells, your hormones, and your long-term risk of disease. One sandwich at a time, one school lunch at a time, one quiet breakfast at a time. Government labs have tested this. Lawsuits have been filed over this. Federal regulators have sent warning letters over this. And most people buying bread every single week, without hesitation, without a second glance at the label, have no idea any of it happened. I went through state lab testing, federal warning letters, court filings, and public recall notices to find out exactly which bread brands are quietly putting your health at risk, and which ones actually deserve a spot in your kitchen. This wasn't guesswork. This was digging through documents most shoppers never see, buried in agency databases and court records, connecting names on grocery shelves to numbers most people will never look up. 13 brands failed this test. Only 3 passed. Let's start with the brand that came back with one of the worst lab readings of any bread tested in America. Number 13 is Sara Lee honey wheat. When state health testers screened popular bread brands for glyphosate, the weed killer chemical found in Roundup, this loaf came back with one of the highest readings in the entire study. Farmers spray glyphosate on wheat fields right before harvest because it dries the crop faster and speeds up the cutting process, saving time and money at scale. The problem is that chemical doesn't just disappear once the crop is cut. It soaks into the grain itself, survives the mill, survives the oven, and lands directly in your sandwich, fully intact, fully active, completely invisible to the naked eye. Glyphosate isn't a fringe concern dreamed up on the internet. The World Health Organization has classified it as a probable human carcinogen, and independent research has connected it to a significantly higher risk of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a cancer of the blood and immune system that can develop silently over years. That's not a rumor whispered in a Facebook group. That's the kind of finding that should make any parent stop, put the loaf back on the shelf, and think twice before packing tomorrow's lunch. But the story doesn't stop at weed killer. Watchdog testing groups have also flagged a chemical called azotocarbonamide in multiple Sara Lee products. This is the same compound used to make foam mats and yoga mats soft, stretchy, and springy underfoot. It's banned outright in the European Union, China, Australia, and Singapore, where using it in food can actually land someone in prison for up to 15 years. Think about that contrast for a second. A chemical serious enough to be a criminal offense on one side of the world is still perfectly legal in the bread aisle on this side of it. Then there's the labeling problem, and this one is arguably worse because it involves trust, not just chemistry. Federal regulators sent a formal warning letter to the parent company behind Sara Lee, accusing them of putting false allergen information on their packaging. Instead of quietly fixing it behind the scenes, the company pushed back and defended its labeling practices publicly, in writing, on the record. Food safety experts called that kind of response almost unheard of in the industry. When you consider that tens of millions of Americans live with food allergies, and that something like sesame can trigger a life-threatening reaction within minutes, a company choosing to argue with a federal regulator instead of simply protecting consumers is a red flag you shouldn't ignore, no matter how familiar the brand name feels. Number 12 is Aunt Millie's Bakehouse. This brand was hit with one of the most serious recalls a food company can face. The classification reserved specifically for situations where a product could cause serious injury or death. The reason was undeclared sesame. Tens of thousands of cases of bread and buns were pulled from store shelves across a dozen states because sesame had been quietly added to the recipe without ever showing up on the printed label. Here's what makes this worse, and it's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. This wasn't the first time it happened. A year earlier, a child suffered an allergic reaction after eating one of this brand's hot dog buns, and that reaction, a child getting sick at the dinner table, is what first alerted the company that sesame had quietly slipped into the formula. Investigators later found the root cause was simply a lack of control over what actually went on the label. 2 separate sesame failures in back-to-back years, and one of them was only caught because a child's body reacted before anyone in the company noticed the mistake. That's not a paperwork error you shrug off. That's a warning sign about how seriously a company actually takes the people eating its food versus how seriously it claims to. Number 11 is Wonder Bread Classic White. This is the loaf that built the entire idea of American white bread. The one grandparents ate, parents ate, and kids still eat today without a single question asked. Lab testing placed this brand among the highest glyphosate readings recorded in a recent state screening. But the chemical concerns don't end there, not even close. This bread contains BHA, a preservative currently under a formal cancer review by federal regulators and listed by toxicology researchers as reasonably expected to cause cancer in humans. It's sitting on store shelves right now, being sold today, while that review is still ongoing behind closed doors. Some formulations of this bread have also used potassium bromate, a flour treatment chemical linked to kidney and thyroid tumors in animal studies. It's been banned across the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, China, and Australia. California banned it back in 2023, and more than a dozen other states have since introduced bills to do the same. The most nostalgic, most iconic bread in America is sitting quietly at the center of a chemical debate most shoppers never hear a single word about. Number 10 is Dave's Killer Bread, specifically the white done right variety. This brand built its entire identity, its entire marketing story, around being the clean, organic alternative to industrial bread. It carries an organic seal. It carries a non-GMO project verified label. And yet, state testing still detected glyphosate inside it, sitting right there in a loaf marketed as the honest choice. That's the part that stings the most. People pay extra, sometimes double the price, specifically to avoid this exact chemical, but it still showed up anyway. Organic certification controls what happens on the farm during the growing season, but it can't fully control drift from neighboring conventional fields, contamination from shared processing equipment, or a wheat supply chain where independent testing has found contamination at extremely high rates across the board. On top of that, this brand is currently facing a certified class action lawsuit over its protein claims. The front of the bag advertises a specific amount of protein per serving, but the lawsuit argues that not all of that protein is actually usable by the human body, and federal rules require labels to reflect real digestible protein content. A second lawsuit in a different state survived an attempt to get it thrown out entirely. 2 separate courts in 2 separate states have allowed these cases to move forward. A brand built entirely on the promise of trust is now defending that exact trust in front of a judge. Number 9 is Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse. This bread sells an image of old-fashioned, simple, rustic baking, the kind you imagine coming out of a wood-fired oven on a real farm somewhere. But flip the bag over, and you'll find more than 16 ingredients listed. Real traditional sourdough has 4. This same parent company has also faced legal scrutiny over no artificial flavors or preservatives claims on other snack products it sells, with a judge allowing that case to proceed rather than dismissing it outright. And this bread line has appeared on lists flagged for potassium bromate, the same chemical linked to tumors in animal studies and banned in dozens of countries around the world. Farmhouse branding on the front of the bag, an industrial ingredient list on the back. That gap between the image being sold and the reality being delivered is exactly what shoppers need to start noticing, one label at a time. Number 8 is Arnold, which is really the same company as Ora Wheat, underneath a different name. Both brands, along with Sara Lee and several others sitting on the very same shelf, are owned by one massive bakery conglomerate that controls a huge share of the entire American bread aisle. That same company received a formal warning letter from federal regulators after several products listed allergens like sesame and tree nuts that weren't even in the food, or failed to properly disclose ones that actually were. Regulators called the labeling false and misleading in plain written language. Instead of correcting it quietly and moving on, the company published a public response defending its own approach. One food safety expert described it as genuinely unusual for a company that size to essentially challenge a federal regulator, instead of simply fixing the label and protecting the people who eat their food. Different bags, different brand names, different colors on the packaging, but the exact same corporate decision-making sitting quietly behind all of them. That's 8 brands down, and already we've seen weed killer residue, banned industrial chemicals, and repeated allergen failures. And a company arguing with federal regulators instead of protecting the people eating their food. And we're only getting started. Before we keep going any further, if this is opening your eyes even a little bit right now, tap that subscribe button so the next brand on this list doesn't slip past you completely. Number 7 is Canyon Bakehouse gluten-free bread. Gluten-free bread is genuinely essential for people managing celiac disease or real gluten sensitivity, and nobody's disputing that need. But being gluten-free doesn't automatically mean being healthier, and this loaf is a near-perfect example of that gap. The first ingredients listed are water, brown rice flour, tapioca flour, and potato starch, a combination that digests fast and spikes blood sugar quickly, almost like eating a slice of candy in bread form. This loaf contains around 1 gram of fiber per slice. Compare that to sprouted breads later on this list that offer 5 times that amount, and you start to see just how thin the nutritional value here really is. Research published in a nutritional science journal found that gluten-free breads made from rice and tapioca produced significantly higher blood sugar spikes than ordinary whole wheat bread. People buying this loaf as a healthy swap may not actually be upgrading anything at all. On top of that, this brand's packaging has come up repeatedly in discussions around PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals linked to thyroid problems and increased cancer risk. Named that way because the human body simply cannot break them down over a lifetime. A gluten-free label on the front doesn't screen for any of that on the back. Number 6 is Whole Foods 365, whole wheat sandwich bread. People pay a real premium here because they trust the store has already done the vetting for them quietly behind the scenes so they don't have to. But independent testing groups have found detectable glyphosate in private label products from premium grocery chains, including this very one. Organic certification means the crop wasn't intentionally sprayed with synthetic pesticides during growing. It does not mean every single batch was independently tested for residue before it ever became bread on a shelf. There's another catch hiding quietly in the ingredient list too. This bread is made with organic wheat flour, not organic whole wheat flour. The bran and the germ, the 2 most nutritious parts of the entire grain, have been stripped away during processing. You're paying a serious premium price for what is essentially refined flour wearing an organic label on the front. Number 5 is Lewis Bake Shop Artisan Style Bread. In 2025, this brand issued a recall after discovering that hundreds of loaves contained visible hazelnuts that were never supposed to be there in the first place. The label only said the product may contain tree nuts, which is a very different, much weaker statement than confirming hazelnuts were actually mixed inside the loaf. For most shoppers, that might sound like a small, forgivable mistake. For someone with a severe hazelnut allergy, it's the difference between a normal breakfast and a terrifying trip to the emergency room. The affected loaves were shipped to stores across multiple states before the mistake was finally caught, and some customers reported physical reactions before the recall was even publicly announced. A food label is supposed to function as a warning system, plain and simple. When that system fails this visibly, in plain sight, the consequences go far beyond a simple inconvenience or a refund. Number 4 is Walmart's Great Value Organic Bread. This loaf technically carries a real, legitimate organic certification, but beyond that single word printed on the bag, shoppers get almost nothing else. No public pesticide testing results anywhere. No named wheat suppliers listed. No transparency at all about where the grain actually comes from before it reaches the factory. Independent testing on other Great Value products has found extremely high pesticide residue levels in some cases, which raises a fair and reasonable question about the sourcing standards behind this entire product line. This doesn't prove every single loaf is contaminated, but it does prove something important and uncomfortable. When a brand's entire identity is built around offering the lowest possible price, testing and transparency are almost always the first costs quietly cut from the budget. Number 3 is Rudy's Organic Bakery White Bread. This brand has built a genuinely strong reputation in the organic bread aisle, and honestly, the reputation isn't entirely undeserved. But reputation is not the same thing as nutrition, and shoppers often confuse the two. This is still, underneath the branding, a soft white loaf built from milled organic wheat flour. It is not sprouted. It is not true, slow-fermented sourdough. It does not carry any meaningful fiber advantage over any other ordinary white bread sitting on the same shelf. Organic tells you how the wheat was grown in the field. It says absolutely nothing about whether the finished bread is actually good for your blood sugar or your gut health. On this loaf specifically, the organic image is doing far more work than the bread itself ever could. Number 2 is Trader Joe's Organic Bread. This brand benefits from one of the strongest trust halos in all of American retail. Shoppers simply assume the store has already double-checked everything sitting on its own shelves, because that's the reputation Trader Joe's has carefully built over decades. But this brand's own recall history tells a more complicated story than the friendly branding suggests, including past recalls involving foreign material discovered in other packaged foods sold under that very same store label. Trader Joe's doesn't actually bake this bread themselves. Production is quietly handled by undisclosed third-party manufacturers, and there is no public supplier information available anywhere, no facility details, and no independent pesticide testing data for shoppers to ever review. The organic certification stamped on the bag is real. Everything sitting behind it, though, is a complete black box. And number 1, the brand sitting in more American kitchens than almost any other bread on this entire list is Nature's Own. This is exactly why it closes out this ranking. Recent state lab testing placed 2 of this brand's most popular varieties among the worst glyphosate readings recorded in the entire study. Not somewhere in the middle, but near the very top. This is the bread millions of parents hand their kids every single morning without a second thought, without ever imagining there could be anything to question. On top of that, the parent company is facing an active class action lawsuit alleging the brand falsely markets itself as free from artificial preservatives, when the ingredient list actually contains synthetic preservatives like calcium propionate printed right there for anyone who looks closely. And in the past, this brand also had to recall thousands of loaves after milk. Containing bread was mistakenly packaged inside bags labeled as dairy-free, a mix-up that could have triggered a severe, even life-threatening allergic reaction in the wrong household at the wrong breakfast table. A brand that markets itself heavily around the word nature ended up with a weed killer reading in official state testing, an active lawsuit over its preservative claims, and a recall over hidden allergens slipping through the cracks. That's the bread sitting in the most kitchens across the entire country. 13 brands, and every single one of them had something quietly hiding behind the label, weed killer residue soaking into the grain, banned industrial chemicals borrowed from completely different products, repeated allergen failures that put real children at risk, lawsuits over false claims, printed in bold letters on the front of the bag, and organic seals that promised far more than they actually delivered underneath. If you've made it this far into the video, you already know more about your bread right now than most people ever will in their entire lives. So do one more thing before we move on. Drop a comment right now telling me which brand on this list actually shocked you the most, because I genuinely want to see it, and then share this video with someone who still grabs the first loaf they see without ever flipping it over to check. Now let's talk about the 3 breads that actually earned a place on your table, the ones that passed every single test we just walked through. These aren't gimmicks dressed up with clever marketing. They're built differently from the ground up, with a completely different philosophy behind them. Number 3 is Silver Hills Sprouted Bread. Instead of grinding raw wheat straight into flour the way almost every other brand does, this brand lets the grain sprout first before it ever touches a mill. That single extra step changes almost everything about how the finished bread behaves once it's inside your body. Sprouting breaks down phytic acid, the compound that normally blocks your body from properly absorbing minerals found naturally in grain, and it also lowers the overall blood sugar impact compared to bread made from that exact same grain simply milled into ordinary flour. Their most popular variety delivers around 5 grams of fiber and 6 grams of protein per slice, with only 1 single gram of sugar. Compare that directly to the 1 gram of fiber found in most of the loaves we already covered on this list, and the difference becomes impossible to ignore. There's no azotocarbonamide here, no BHA, no potassium bromate, and no calcium propionate. The ingredient list is refreshingly short, and every single item on it actually looks and reads like real food, not a manufacturing shortcut disguised as bread. It even has a noticeably shorter shelf life than most industrial bread on the shelf next to it, and that's not a flaw at all. It's proof that nothing synthetic is quietly doing the preserving work for it behind the scenes. Number 2 is Food for Life's Ezekiel bread. This loaf contains no flour at all, none whatsoever. It's made entirely from sprouted grains and legumes combined together only after they've already fully germinated, including wheat, barley, millet, lentils, soybeans, and spelt, all working together in one loaf. Sprouting these grains before baking activates natural enzymes, breaks down anti-nutrients that would otherwise block absorption, and dramatically improves the overall protein quality of the finished bread. The result is one of the only mainstream breads available anywhere that delivers a genuinely complete protein, meaning it contains all 9 essential amino acids your body actually needs, all packed into a single slice. There's 0 added sugar, 0 artificial preservatives, and 0 of the chemicals we spent this entire video uncovering across 13 other brands. Its glycemic index is roughly half that of standard white bread, and that gap matters enormously for anyone eating bread on a daily routine basis. It's sold frozen, and that alone is actually the clearest possible signal of its integrity as a product. Without artificial preservatives propping it up, it simply cannot survive sitting out at room temperature for very long. If a bread genuinely needs to live in your freezer to stay fresh, that usually means nothing artificial is quietly keeping it soft on a store shelf. And number 1, the single best option of all, sitting above every packaged brand on this entire list, is real sourdough from a genuine local bakery. The best bread you can possibly buy isn't sold in a plastic bag at all. It's sitting behind a bakery counter made from just 4 honest ingredients: flour, water, salt, and a live starter culture. Nothing else added, nothing else needed. True sourdough ferments for at least 12 full hours, and that long, slow fermentation isn't just about developing a better flavor. It's chemistry quietly working in your favor the entire time. Research reviewing multiple clinical studies found that authentic sourdough produces noticeably lower blood sugar spikes compared to commercially made bread. Fermentation also breaks down phytic acid over those long hours, helping your body absorb significantly more minerals from the grain. And it partially breaks down gluten proteins as well, making the finished bread genuinely easier to digest for most people. No additives sold anywhere, no dough conditioner, no processing aid, can fully replicate what time and natural fermentation quietly do entirely on their own. Here's the catch though, and it's an important one to understand. Most bread labeled sourdough, sold in ordinary grocery stores, isn't real sourdough at all, no matter what the packaging claims. It's made with ordinary commercial yeast instead of a live starter, then flavored afterward with vinegar or lactic acid to fake that familiar tangy taste, completely skipping the real fermentation process that actually matters. If you see commercial yeast listed on the ingredient panel, it is not true sourdough. If vinegar shows up anywhere on that same list, that's another clear giveaway, hiding in plain sight. The next time you're standing in front of a bread shelf trying to decide, flip the bag over and simply count the ingredients listed. If that list is longer than flour, water, salt, and starter, put it right back on the shelf. Better yet, find a genuine local bakery near you and simply ask 2 direct questions. Do they use a live starter culture, and how long does the dough actually ferment before it goes into the oven? Those 2 honest answers will tell you absolutely everything you need to know before buying a single loaf. Think for a second about how completely ordinary this all felt before you watch this video. Grabbing a familiar loaf off the shelf without a second thought. Trusting a brand name simply because your parents trusted it too. That's exactly how something this serious quietly hides in plain sight for decades at a time. Not through secrecy, locked behind closed doors, but through pure routine. Through the quiet, unquestioned assumption that if a product is sitting on a store shelf, it must already be fine for your family. It isn't secrecy that lets weed killer residue end up inside a sandwich bag in the first place. It's habit. It's the simple fact that most of us stopped actually reading labels a long time ago, because we learned to trust the friendly picture on the front far more than the honest words printed on the back. That trust was never truly verified by anyone checking. It was simply assumed, generation after generation, one loaf at a time. You don't have to overhaul your entire pantry tonight, and nobody's asking you to throw everything out at once. You just have to start looking, starting with the very next loaf you pick up. Pick up the bread you already buy every week and turn it over, count the ingredients slowly. Ask yourself honestly what's actually inside it, not what the colorful front of the bag desperately wants you to believe about itself. That one small habit, repeated every single time you shop, is genuinely enough to change what ends up on your plate and quietly inside your body for years and years to come. Bread was never supposed to be this complicated. For thousands of years, it was simply flour, water, salt, and time, nothing more and nothing less. Somewhere along the way, convenience and shelf life quietly took priority over what was actually good for the people eating it every single day. You now know exactly which loaves quietly crossed that line, and which ones never did, no matter how they were marketed to you. The next choice sitting in front of you is entirely yours to make, and it starts the very next time you walk down that bread aisle, holding a little more knowledge than you walked in with.